the elections in South Africa?
I have a conspiracy theory. I believe MK was created to take votes away from EFF. CBC would destroy a generation of Kenyans. But who brought CBC? That CBC was developed by the British Council.
Do you think somebody can make a strong argument today in the same manner Walter Rodney made the argument in 1972?
The Berlin conference. It was each person got a sphere to extract. That paradigm has never changed. The leading opposition candidate in Nigeria in the last election was sponsored by the state. We had Huduma number, the first iteration. It was about capturing data and then selling it to MasterCard Foundation. My other arrest was around that.
The status quo candidate just changed the clothes.
If you listen to Joshua Maponga, you talk about witchcraft, and he jokes about, like, the white man came and said, witchcraft is that? Witchcraft. Most of the first prime ministers or presidents in the Commonwealth went to LSE. Then IMF comes to rescue us, as if they don't know what their sister organization is doing. I think our economic policy right now, everything is dictated by the IMF, whatever is being implemented.
That's International Relations 101. You always learn from day one. National interests. States have interests. Full stop.
You mentioned D. He's a product of the World Bank, but also Rhodes Scholar. Indoctrinate them, Oxbridge, bring them back. Let me go tribal because we are Kenyans. If you look at Kalenjins who are educated, most of them can't get jobs within Ruto's government. I remember a story John Githongo told me, and they couldn't find the money. Yes, he has gone the way of the KANUs and the CCMs and other parties that came before it.
It's only the surface that has changed. How can you actually decolonize such systems?
The revolution that came during the 10 years of Kibaki was more of freeing Kenyans from the colonial, because Barclays and Standard Chartered were colonial banks. But it has come to light that Kenyatta was actually installed by the British. They put what Franz Fanon called black mask, white faces.
White masks, black skin.
Candidates like Raila and Ruto, before elections, going to the US and then going to Chatham House and to be entrusted with the country, because the country still belongs to other people. There are people here, British people who live in this country, who call the shots from behind the scenes. You'll never see them.
The achievement of black people, for instance, were whitewashed out of history. So we were simply refocusing the camera, so to speak.
Most Kenyans knew me because of my campaign against IMF, where I was arrested. Now Kenyans are seeing what we were talking about. I know Dr. Wandia Njoya really pushed back. So you have an education system of cut-off. So I've been advocating against that.
These people are teaching pseudo-history, and they're teaching lies in the name of history.
I think because he was accomplished himself, he was not threatened by accomplished people.
So that was almost like an unintended consequence of going to LSE.
So banks stopped being lazy. I remember Barclays hooking loans in the streets.
You used the word conveyor belt or something of the sort.
Yeah, it's actually
Episode 003 of the Nubianometry podcast. Geopolitics, geoeconomics, and development issues on the African continent. In today's episode, we have a very interesting guest, a very captivating and thought-provoking guest. His name is Mwalimu Mutemi wa Kiama. Mwalimu Mutemi wa Kiama is a well-known social justice activist. He is also a community organizer at the Kongamano la Mapinduzi here in Kenya, among many other things. A couple of years ago, in fact, Kenyan media labeled him as an anti-IMF loans crusader. So you know that today's episode is going to be really thought-provoking. We'll explore his views and insights on a range of topics, such as, is colonialism still to blame for problems in the third decade of the 21st century Africa, decolonizing African education systems and literature, reparation debates, issues such as the concept of gatekeeper states, and whether the post-colonial African state economic systems are really working for the African masses. We'll also look at a topic like settler versus non-settler post-colonial states, and many others. If you don't want to miss a beat on a very inspiring and captivating and thought-provoking intellectual discussion, stay on for the next hour. Mwalimu Mutemi wa Kiama, thank you for honoring the request to come to the podcast.
Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, and maybe will you also want to introduce yourself a little bit in your own words?
What I can do is add to that introduction, which was quite on point. So I just want to say, as a community organizer, what I mean by community is that we bring people together around issues, certain issues, to be able to address, discuss and address their issues, and that could be at multiple levels. So a community is a group of people who have similar interests. And so when you talk about being a community organizer, is bringing together people mostly towards addressing challenges facing a group. So lately, I've gotten another feather. I'm referring to myself as a chief evangelist of the Hutu philosophy, so better known by most Africans as Ubuntu. I am because we are, it's about empathy, it's about our humanness, it's about exploring how to look after each other as humanity, which is, as Africans, traditionally, we used to say a child belongs to the village. But somehow, because of capitalism, we seem to have lost that. So I've founded an organization called Mzalendo Halisi Foundation, and the organization is about mainstreaming the principle, what I call the religion, and the religion in quotes of Hutu philosophy, exploring that, how that would apply in our society, in our interactions as Kenyans and Africans, in our education systems, in our governance systems, in our spiritual systems. How do we coexist and how do we lift up each other rather than right now, whereby in the capitalist system we focus on bringing each other down.
Yeah.
Because like if you look at a corporate organization and office politics, it's about coming out on top, unnecessary competition when we could cooperate. And I think I believe that humanity solves challenges when we come together.
Okay.
If you look at the most advancements that humanity has faced in the last 10,000 years, it's we advance when we learn to work together as communities rather than the individualism and consumerism that is advocated by capitalism.
Okay.
The last 200 years of capitalism has caused an imbalance in humanity and with the rest of species and ecosystems on this planet. So how do we explore how we can solve that challenge?
Okay. So maybe to ease into the conversation, something that is happening currently, maybe it was not part of what you're going to discuss, but I think it's quite interesting. The elections in South Africa. South Africa just went to the vote 2 days ago, and the results are still coming in. I think I checked in the past hour. 60% of the results have already been counted. And it appears ANC, of course, is going to lose their majority, 45% for ANC at the moment. DA is second at 22%. Umkhonto Sizwe, interestingly enough, the party of Jacob Zuma, the former president, 13%. And the EFF, which people are thinking was going to really perform well this time round, they are doing 9-10%. What's your take on the current developments in terms of the results coming in?
First of all, it's sad that there are very few independence parties in Africa. I mean, ANC has gone the way of the KANUs and the CCMs and other parties that came before it, whereby you become the status quo and then you entrench yourself and then you betray the cause of the way the people put you in there. So that's one. But the other thing is that MK, Umkhonto, Sizwe, and EFF are just splinters of ANC.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I have a conspiracy theory. I think Umkhonto Sizwe was created by some stalwarts. Mostly, I tend to believe when the EFF talks about white monopoly capital, which has backed the ANC, and especially Ramaphosa, for a long time.
For a long time.
And because EFF was threatening to run with it, or rather to get a majority that could make it hard for ANC to push its agenda in the parliament, I believe MK was created to take votes away from EFF. And that has particularly worked. I mean, it's something that even in Kenya we have perfected. Nigeria has perfected across Africa.
Yeah.
I have it on very good authority that the leading opposition candidate in Nigeria in the last election was sponsored by the state to take votes away from another opposition candidate who was likely to be more challenging, to challenge the status quo, but who the status quo did not want. So they actually sponsored the argument is that Peter Obi was actually a candidate of the state to take the youth vote away from the main opposition.
Atiku.
Yeah.
Abubakar.
Who wasn't wanted. So, and this is from strategists who actually worked in that campaign.
Oh, wow.
So and this thing
the
was
idea of bringing in a spoiler candidate with a spoiler
Kenya
party.
has perfected that.
I think Kenya, it has happened
we
many times.
We have honed that. The first time I encountered it was in Mali, whereby the opposition that had come in and then been in power for about 20 years had become status quo, and now they were going to be removed. Another opposition had organized itself. But since it wanted to succeed itself, 2 years before the elections, the deputy president left, or vice president left, acrimoniously, joined the opposition embraced him, so he became their candidate.
Yeah.
And then, of course, won the election. So the
the status quo candidate just changed
actually,
the clothes.
Yeah, they actually played a game where their preferred candidate is the one who won, but under the opposition. And this has been playing across Africa. So I think it's interesting. I don't know what EFF will learn from this, but I think Zuma is even if it's not Ramaphosa who sponsored it.
Yeah, because some people are saying maybe also Zuma, the way he was unceremoniously kicked out of the party and hounded out of the presidency, he is also still maybe bitter towards ANC, and that's why he decided to take over Umkhonto Sizwe.
Very true. But what we see is that the elite, their interests always supersede some of these divisions they have.
And small differences between the politicians.
So, Zuma would be more served. And even there's an interview he did a few days ago, and he said in Kenya we would say ANC Damu.
Yeah.
And the interviewer was trying to ask him, what do you mean and you're running another party? He said, no. I said, for a long time I'm ANC in my heart. So that is something to be explored.
Maybe it's the BBC interview?
I can't remember. There's a lady. Okay. I'll share with you the video.
Okay. Yeah. Last week I had one on BBC World Service, and of course he also mentioned I was a freedom fighter during the 80s and the 70s, etc.
But the main thing is Zuma is in his 80s.
Yeah.
Why is he running? Why is he running apart? Why can't he just go to Seychelles and enjoy his retirement?
Exactly.
So his intentions are not noble for South Africa.
Yeah.
And he has money, so it's not about money.
It's not
about power. He already has the power. So what is it about? What is the other interest? And that's the interesting bit. Like, why did he need to come out and form? Even if it's forget even about EFF, just spoiling for ANC. Why would he do that?
Yeah.
Even if he has gripe, So there's definitely some force behind that has been behind the party, and of course we know who financed him when he was president and all that. We know about the Guptas and all these people and the Oppenheimers. So logical conclusion would be they are behind. And what they are doing now is ethnicizing South Africa, because now, if you look at where the community comes from, the Zulu.
KwaZulu-Natal
is where he has done well.
Yeah.
KwaZulu-Natal and even Mpumalanga and I don't know, Western Cape. Where he has done well is where Zulus are a huge population.
Yeah.
So now that brings in a tribal element, which might play in forthcoming elections. If we decide to mobilize now ethnically, then what has he done to South? What would be his legacy for South Africa?
Yeah. Okay, quite interesting. So let's get into the conversation proper, Mwalimu Mutemi. Let me start with a historical perspective. It's the year 1972 in Dar es Salaam. The Pan-African historian, academic, thought leader, Walter Rodney, of course from Guyana. He's living in Tanzania at the time, and he writes his magnus opus, how Europe underdeveloped Africa. 50, 60 years later, today, let's say if we are talking about 2024, some people argue that some of the problems still facing the African continent are as a result of the colonial legacy. Some people say, maybe not. Maybe people need to move beyond the argument of colonialism is still the cause of most, if not all, of the problems facing Africa. Do you think somebody can make a strong argument today in the same manner Walter Rodney made the argument in 1972? That still it's the colonial legacy, it's the colonial powers, and maybe it has become neo-colonial? Or do you think 50, 60 years down the road, whether what African countries received at the time was flag independence, whether it was really independence, that we can still put the blame or lay the blame at the feet of colonialism?
I would say yes, in a word. And a lot of people, push back on that argument. They say you've had, self rule or independence for 6 decades. Why haven't you changed this? But the reality, for those who, analyzing what was informing Walter Rodney and analyzing systems that exist today, it's quite clear that, first of all, the independence that we thought we got, and I'll start with Kenya. We considered Kenyatta a founding father. But it has come to light so far, in the last few years, that Kenyatta was actually installed by the British. Even then, the Mau Mau actually said that he was not one of them. But for some reason, he wasn't listened to, and I think part of the reason is the monopoly of means of communication, media.
Like the media at the time?
Yeah, control of the media. The fact that for a long time we had Voice of Kenya, which then turned into KBC, until the 90s when you got the FM stations. That's when you could get in a word edgewise that's not controlled by the state.
Yeah.
And of course, that has come to where we are now, where you have a podcast like yours or social media, and whereby information that was confined to some libraries or some archives is now available online. So people can research. For example, when you talk about the Goldenberg report, talk about the Kroll report, the one that exposed a lot of the corruption that happened during one of the biggest corruption cases. When you talk to the guys, the forensic auditors who traced what happened with that case, I spoke to one of them and he says he found all that information in the Kenya National Archives.
Oh, okay.
So the information was there, but people had not accessed it, although the information was there. Some of it was released, the normal 30 years, the usual way of releasing official documents, because they were able to trace that, the Goldenberg, to a lot of things that had happened since independence and before independence during the colonial government. It was a pattern. It was a way of using public projects to privatize public resources. And so what the Goldenberg scandal was, it was just another project similar to others that had happened before.
So something that was repeating itself over time.
Something that was repeating. And it was very British. And I think now, tying it now to that question of whether 60 years after independence we can still talk about colonialism, is that what the British did, and they did this across the Commonwealth, and most colonial, now it's emerging with the French. We are coming to the realization with the CFA and the central banks, is that they put what Franz Fanon called black mask, white faces. So Africans who believed they were white, or who had been socialized.
It's white masks, black skin.
Black skin, yeah. So those are the guys who are put in governance. And it's logical because if you're going to hand over an administration, then you'd hand over to people with certain skill sets. And the people who had the skill sets to run a government, who are actually running government at that time, were the sons and daughters of the loyalists within those countries. So the people who had gone to school, to Alliance, to Mangu, to Stalhet, wherever, who had the skill sets altogether to Makerere and to London School of Economics, including Jomo Kenyatta and Mwai Kibaki, were a certain cadre of people. And these people had, their loyalty was not with the people of Kenya or Tanzania or Uganda or wherever. Their loyalties were to the people who had brought them up. And we've seen the struggle even in just being Kenyan. I think you've experienced in some schools where you go, and if you come from Nairobi, you're regarded as superior to someone who comes from the village.
Yeah, exactly.
That classism, it's a very British thing, which is you are socialized and culturalized into. And the more you could speak English with a certain accent, or the more you went to certain schools, or the more you come from a certain neighborhood. Colonialism is not just having an overload, it's also mental. In fact, what Bob Marley sang is emancipate yourself from mental slavery. And the slavery that we've had, slavery came even before colonialism. So if we have not dealt with the mental slavery, how can you even deal with colonialism? And you can tell now the companies that run specific sectors of the economy, whether it's the motor industry, whether it's the tea, coffee, ranching, mining. All these things have an African face in front, but the shareholding is either British or American, or so that's what we mean that we've never really gotten independence. And unfortunately, also, the people in power are the one who influence the education system. And our education system has emphasized our inferiority and the superiority of the Western culture and that kind of thing. So when you say we have never gotten independence, part of it is that. But also is that there are people here, British people who live in this country, who call the shots from behind the scenes. You'll never see them in front. But you will see candidates like Raila and Ruto before elections going to the US and then going to Chatham House. Because they have to reassure these people. And they have to speak a certain language and they have to give certain assurances. And then once those people accept, then you see them getting support to be elected, to be candidates, and to be entrusted with the country, because the country still belongs to other people. That is my take of it.
That's your take of it.
And that's just Kenya now. And unfortunately, because we have silos, we only see this. Once you start traveling across Africa, that's when you realize how bad it is, because it's repeated in almost every African country.
In every African country.
Yeah. So that's one. Now, the other bit is, as you said, I'm known as, most Kenyans knew me because of my campaign against IMF, where I was arrested by the DCI for asking the IMF not to loan Kenya money. So the other structures, the Bretton Woods institutions, are the other way colonialism has been perpetuated, or rather the banking industry. Whereby you keep Africa in debt, and you're leveraging our taxes, you're leveraging our natural resources, minerals, commercial, agriculture. What are they called?
Non-mineral raw materials. Tea, coffee, cocoa.
But also something that most people don't see. When you take brightest young minds, give them scholarship. For example, if you do very well in the University of Nairobi or Moi University or a Kenyan university, if you get a first class honors, you automatically get a scholarship
to the Ivy
League. To the Ivy League. That's brain drain. You'll go there, you'll be socialized, then you'll be sent back. Your mentality is very different when you come back, because you're inducted into a different class, and that class is the one that the elite that rule the world, what we call the comprador elite. And this started way before Jomo Kenyatta, as I said, went to London School of Economics.
LSE.
Mwai Kibaki went to LSE. Most of the first prime ministers or presidents in the Commonwealth went to LSE. And the model was train them, send them back, capture their minds, send them back into their community so that they rule the former colonies for the interest of the British Empire. So you won't see the empire, but it's there. Americans then learned, this is how it's done. So they started their own. And that's how the IMF and the World Bank. If you look at the debt that we are repaying, we are struggling with, that has led to increase in taxes in Kenya. A lot of that, especially in the medical field, has been given by the World Bank. Even despite the corruption that Kenyans have been complaining about, despite obvious cases of misappropriation of those funds, IMF kept giving money. And then their sister organization, and not IMF, but the World Bank.
The World Bank, yeah.
Then IMF comes to rescue us. As if they don't know what their sister organization is doing. But what you see, this is used to trap you, to entrap us. So, because right now, if you look at, I think our economic policy right now, everything is dictated by the IMF. Whatever is being implemented last year and this year, even the new budget, is actually written by the IMF. You mentioned D is a product of the World Bank, and also
fellow.
But also Rhodes Scholar. Rhodes is take the best brains, take them to Oxford or Cambridge, indoctrinate them, Oxbridge, bring them back to, and that's why you find such disconnect. But that's how colonialism has been perpetuated, because of what you've done is put those black skins who have white masks in front, so that when you look at William Ruto, you see a hustler from I don't know where who used to sell chicken.
Yeah.
But this guy's mentality is totally, like
different.
It's the extractive colonial state. These states were created to extract. When they subdivided Africa in 1885 in the Berlin conference, it was each person got a sphere to extract. That paradigm has never changed. All they did was put black skins to help extract, and the extraction continues. Or it changes in terms of who's in front, or whether it's what industry.
So the front face.
Yeah, right now it's with the social media, the Googles and the Facebooks and the who's.
Big tech.
Now it's big tech and data, so that they're still mining our data. We had Huduma number, the first iteration. It was about capturing data and then selling it to MasterCard Foundation. Such things. And that's what actually my other arrest was around that. It was around exposing the person behind Huduma number. I did a thread that showed the sons and daughters of colonial chiefs and where they are today on Twitter. And where they are in positions of influence. And Kenyans were like, it went viral because Kenyans would say, oh, that's why that person was made a minister. That's why that person was made a permanent secretary. That's why that person runs that company. All these people have the connection to the colonial infrastructure. Now these are maybe the third or fourth generation. But with the same families. So that's how colonialism continues to date.
In the previous episode, I had an academic, Dr. Alex Kamau, on the show, and we actually touched a little bit about the IMF thing. And my point was, from what I have heard, there's this notion that Kibaki avoided the IMF a lot. He was a trained economist, of course, we talked about LSE, but he tried to avoid going the IMF way because he knew it always comes with very strict and tough conditions. And so the point is, people can say, the IMF is part of this neo-colonial infrastructure or substructure and everything. But if you look at, let's say another example, South Korea, of course it received a lot of capital and help from the US for it to industrialize. Singapore the same. But like those two countries, even in the 70s and the 60s, when the IMF went with a rescue program, they rejected and said no. In the 80s and the 90s, they always tried to avoid the IMF as much as they could. So could someone not argue that if African leaders across the entire continent, if they had pushed back against IMF, I mean, you can't blame IMF because IMF, even if there's very strict conditions, like they have to offer them to you. And if you are, let's say, keeping your books well, maybe you cannot argue that this person is entrapping us.
No, that person would be right in a way, because they'll be right in that it's the elite, and that's why I give that background of how they came into be, are the ones who have sold out Africa. If you had elite who could push back, if you look at what Kibaki did, he actually allowed the Chinese to come in and destabilize the balance of power. And the Chinese came and entered the entire region. And for the last 10 years, America and the West have been fighting back to regain control. Because before that, most industry in this region belonged to the West.
Yeah.
And then the Chinese came and built infrastructure and that kind of thing.
They
and the reason why
the
Kibaki was,
gut,
the reason why Kibaki was able to resist was the influence of China, because he could get the loans from elsewhere.
Yeah.
We still got loans, only that we didn't get them from the IMF and the World Bank. But Kibaki, I think, is what we would say his strength was living within our means. So he tried to finance most of those things. Like if he's taking a loan, we know where the money is going, to what project. We know what that project is bringing in, and we know that it will be able to repay. So Uhuru came and upset that and just did grandiose things without looking at where, productivity.
Okay.
How do you make the economy productive? Kibaki never increased taxes, but he expanded taxes. He got more people paying.
He expanded the tax base.
Yeah, expanded the tax base so that we had more coming in to be able to take. I think at the end of his term, Kenya was financing 95% of its budget from taxes. So you're just borrowing maybe 5%. So the person would be right that the elite have sold out. But the reason is, why have they sold out? Is because you're in a system that teaches you to look after your own interests or the interest of the person who will give you the 10%. Our elite are lazy also. So to create industry, if you look at any Kenyan or African who has a company that is doing well, it takes years and years of investment, of suffering, of not sleeping,
of perseverance,
hard work. We see them when they've made it, but we don't know the tears, the blood and tears that goes into it. But now we have an elite that want to compete with that person. Immediately they get into power and they want to either shareholding in that company or and they create nothing. They will not start industry. It will be rent seeking. They want to steal money and buy apartments in Dubai, which is what is happening right now. That's why I was saying it's a product of our education system, culturalization and socialization, whereby if you play ball with certain people, then the reward is access to this kind of resources without having to work. So yes, that is it, but also that is a product of these education systems that have been put. For example, right now CBC, people are now seeing what we resisted it 5 years ago. Now Kenyans are seeing what we were talking about. I know Dr. Wandia Njoya really pushed back.
She's been quite active on that topic, even on Twitter.
And we were part of what she was speaking to. She was actually articulating. There was a group of educationists, and as a community organizer, I actually created a group called Elimu Tuitakayo. And we were all in that space and we would discuss. We actually even hosted a meeting where we brought in teachers, Sosion was there, and all that. And it was very clear that CBC would destroy a generation of Kenyans. But who brought CBC? That CBC was developed by the British Council. Why 60 years of independence, when you're independent, are the British designing your education system? And not just in Kenya, in Ghana too, and across Africa. You say, we don't look at the entire continent. Why? Because they don't want a woke African population. That's why they keep meddling with your education system.
But if I were to be the devil's advocate and say there is a lot of unemployment, the government over the past decades has not been creating enough jobs for graduates. So instead of continuing to churn out more graduates, why don't we reform the education system so that even you can bring in systems that can cater for people with vocational and technical jobs?
The idea behind CBC is very noble. Actually, I advocated for it way before. Skills-based education system that also looks at your passions, what you're gifted at. I know Dr. Andia does not like talking about gifts, but I believe people have, what would you call it? There are those things that you're passionate about or interest you. And then if that interest is discovered early enough and you're empowered, then you can become quite good in advancing that, whether it's through research or just practice. I'm trying to avoid the use talent because I know
it has a certain connotation.
Yeah, it has a certain connotation. You could call it talent. There are people who are inclined towards music. There are people who are inclined towards art. There are people who are inclined towards science. And those inclinations usually cannot be ignored, but we've been ignoring them and trying to hammer people to be similar. Which is the Industrial Revolution kind of education system where we produce a certain number of managers, a certain number of supervisors, a certain number of engineers, a certain number. So you have an education system of cutoff. So I've been advocating against that. So CBC in itself...
There's one interview you used the word conveyor belt or something of the
Yeah,
sort.
it's actually it's a conveyor belt of, just whatever number of... But that was the 1800s, when you needed clerks and machine operators and that kind of thing. So that was an education meant for that era, but we are still doing it. So CBC was noble in that way, but it was captured. Because what happens is that these people, as I said, have their own people within the system and agenda. And so they're able to influence certain people who are now developing the policy. Why didn't we have national conferences across the country to determine which education system we need? In fact, to the point where people in Turkana maybe might have theirs tweaked in a certain way to suit their way of life. People in Mandera might have theirs tweaked in a certain way to suit their way of life. Why do we need a standard education system across Kenya when people of the coast, people of Mount Kenya, have different, they're interacting with the environment very differently.
Very differently.
So there's what can be standard and there's what then needs to be based on your environment and the way your work environment.
Tailored to the specific needs of each
region. I think we are in a space where that is possible. And government's work is not to create jobs. That's another mistake we've been making, is to create an enabling environment for Kenyans to thrive. It's you and I who create jobs.
Yeah.
It's the Mama Mboga and the boda guy who works with his boda, buys another one tomorrow, employs someone to ride that one.
Yeah.
Mama Mboga who expands from a kibandaski to a shop.
Yeah, to a shop.
And employs somebody, the M-Pesa person. Those are the people who create jobs. But they only do that if the economy they are in allows them to save, allows them to thrive, allows you and I to afford to buy their products so that there's money circulating in the economy. And that's what Kibaki did.
Okay.
There was money circulating in the economy. I think most of us bought our first cars during that. And we got loans from banks. I remember that time, before that, banks never used to loan ordinary Kenyans or just someone employees.
So
my first car, I got a loan.
After NAC came into
power. After
NAC
came into power, because Kibaki stopped borrowing from the banks, the Kenyan banks. He expanded the tax base. Then he told banks, go and lend money to Kenyans. We are not going to take the treasury bills and bonds. Akazitoa. So banks stopped being lazy. I remember Barclays hooking loans in the streets.
Oh.
Barclays that had been closing branches across the country was selling, put tents in the streets of Nairobi.
Wow.
And they were selling. But that time, Barclays used to have minimum account balance of 5,000 shillings. And if you didn't go to check your account, top up that account, by the end of 3-4 months, that money would be gone. It'd be eaten by ledger fees. Equity came with 400 bob. You open an account, no ledger fees, nothing. That enabled the middle class to be able to borrow, to save, first of all. And then because they have savings, then the bank can trust them and give them money. And that's led... So the revolution that came during the 10 years of Kibaki was more of freeing Kenyans from the colonial, because Barclays and Standard Chartered were colonial banks, and allowing industry to thrive and creating an enabling environment. Then jobs were created. So CBC, properly implemented, properly meaning there is infrastructure. Part of what if you're going to...
there was a video of kids swimming somewhere in Turkana or Marsabit.
Yeah.
They were swimming just in dust.
Remember when these guys were going to introduce, taxes on swimming pools? Government of Kenya has never built a single swimming, apart from Nyayo Stadium maybe and Kasarani.
Yeah.
Most of the swimming pools around here are built by either schools or private individuals, private schools, private individuals.
Hotels.
If you go to, we talk about kids sitting under trees in a class, in Turkana or in Wajir or wherever. There's a way you can tweak their CBC to suit their environment. As much as Article 43 requires the government to provide the facilities, the reality is that it has not.
Yeah.
So do we throw away those kids? There's a way we can tweak the education system to be relevant to them. And CBC could have been that. But then the CBC that was implemented assumed everybody has a computer, everybody has a phone, can print whatever.
Yeah.
So it was actually geared towards rich kids, the middle class, kids of the middle class. And someone said they wanted to re-educate the parents using so even the intentions
using the
changed.
kids.
Using the kids by forcing parents to do some of these exercises.
Re-education by proxy.
They are being educated by proxy. I mean, the intentions changed. So the idea was noble. So I would totally agree. It was
But that is the fear you, Dr. Wandi Njoya, and many other people have, that the thing currently being implemented will end up disadvantaging a very big chunk of the next generation.
Let me answer that question this way. If you go to Finland, because one of the examples of the best education system in the world is in Finland, and we looked at it, or rather our bureaucrats went to look at it. In Finland, every primary school in that country has similar facilities. Okay? You'll find same labs, same workshops, same sports and play, and whatever. Such that if you move to Kisumu from here and you take your kids, they'll just go and enter that school. There'll be no culture shock, there'll be no nothing. That's one. Two, by the time there are no exams until most probably when you're finishing high school. Then you want to specialize, going to college, so you do exams. But kids who are 14, 15 in Finland most of them can speak an average of 5 languages. And the number of average hours you spend in class are 2. You are going to school, but you don't sit in a class to learn. You go to, for example, if you talked about amplitude. If your amplitude is in music, then you will go and you'll go to National Theatre and find, Kenyans there playing whatever instruments they are playing. The professionals now. You sit with them, you talk to them, and they mentor you. And so you're able to integrate into that quite early. If your interest is in engineering, you will go to industrial area. You see those guys who do, manufacture, steel, and whatever. So very early. 3 is that if you are the best mathematicians in Finland, top of your class when you finish uni and you graduate, go all the way, get a PhD in mathematics, you will go and teach early childhood or primary school in mathematics. But you're paid top salary. Why? Because they want the next generation of Finns to be taught by their best brains, current generation. In Kenya, the one who fails even to go to teachers' college are the ones who become teachers. In early childhood development. People who have failed in the education system. I mean, that information is available. And Africans who once they're given a chance, once they go to a place where school education system works, where they
always rise to the top.
They rise to the top. And it's in everything, in sports, in the arts. That's why the best musicians are African. The best athletes are Africans. If you look at science, behind the labs, some of the best discoveries, which mostly were not talked about, the landing of a spacecraft on the moon, that African lady.
The African lady who
did,
and she did the math, and it was in the era without computers.
Where there were no computers. So and that's what I call arrested development. We have so much potential as a continent. As Kenyans are running multinationals out there. They are running countries. They're running countries in the south. You go to South Africa, Namibia, Botswana. The civil servants are mostly Kenyans. But here at home, they can't get the opportunity. Even industry. IBM and all that. NASA has employed quite a number of Kenyans. McKinsey has employed quite a number of Kenyans. Here at home, they can't get
they can't break through.
They can't break through. And they become a threat once they come here. If you look at, let me go tribal because we are Kenyans. If you look at Kalenjins who are educated, most of them can't get jobs within Ruto's government. Because they are a threat to him. They're not just him. Even one of the other successes of Kibaki, go back to Kibaki, was that he was not threatened by, I think because he was accomplished himself, he was not threatened by accomplished people. So he surrounded himself with very accomplished people as ministers and permanent secretaries and heads of departments in government. That's why his government did well.
So that was almost like an unintended consequence of going to LSE.
It could be, because I think he also developed his own philosophy. He knew what the LSE was about. And I'm not
and he was well grounded.
Kibaki
He was well grounded
created
in
the
economics.
bureaucracy. He created the bureaucracy when he joined. He came back as executive of KANU in 1956 from Makerere, and then joined the Ministry of Planning. He built the Kenyan bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy was just a continuation of the colonial structure, but now just tweaking here and there. So one of the reasons why I think he succeeded is because he knew that bureaucracy, he had built it, so he was able to. I remember a story John Githongo told me one day when they were doing the free primary school education and they couldn't find the money. The PSCs and all that were trying to find where do you find money, and they came to Kibaki and they gave him, he said, give me the numbers. He looked at the numbers, he looked at the lines and he said, okay, if you tweak here, cut this, cut that, or your numbers are balanced. Because he knew the system.
He knew it quite well.
He had built it. He had that advantage, and then of course the intellectual capacity. Despite having had a stroke, I think what we have right now is last 10 years and now going forward is lack of intellectual capacity in our leadership. And right now we have a leader who not just lacks the intellectual capacity, is threatened by intellectual capacity. So he has surrounded himself with idiots. And he thinks he can run an economy with IMF, advising him. They'll just use him to, as they are using him, as Kenyans can now start seeing. Because he can't understand the deeper issues. He thinks he can go to climate change and get the money because it's low-hanging fruit. But they can see him coming. And so even when they tell him, we want your land,
so in your view, they might even push the tree branch lower so that you quickly run for the low-hanging fruit, because...
It's when you see these UAE guys coming here and giving him a private jet, and then he goes and gives them land, it calls it for $8 million
carbon credits, carbon
this
offsetting.
Guy cannot negotiate because he's too greedy and he doesn't have the intellectual capacity to... to do that. And that's the interesting thing, is that the UAE guys are doing what is in the best interests of their countries.
Of their country,
And even the IMF, being an American thing, it's doing what is in the best interests of America. Why aren't African leaders, why isn't Ruto doing what is the best interests of Kenya, when they sit at the table to deal? Why wouldn't he do what is in the best interest for Kenya, but for himself, just for himself, and a few cronies around him? That is the tragedy of Africa.
That's international relations 101. You always learn from day one, national interests. States have interests, full stop. They have to maximize those interests. And everything they do, always bear in mind at the back of your head, at the back of your mind, that their interest will always come first.
We say, in the corporate world, there's no free lunch.
There is no free lunch. There is no such thing as a free lunch.
I have to ask myself, what does this guy want?
Some people even attribute that quote back to Socrates. So tying that to one of the themes about decolonizing these education systems, or even literature, for instance, how can you then do that, actually? Like, is the system so rigid? Is this system where you say even 60 years later, the neo-colonial substructure or the colonial substructure has not changed? It's only the surface that has changed. How can you actually decolonize such systems? The economic, the education, even literature, like the books people are reading, the kind of plays people are doing. Because even in our own education here in Kenya, maybe the time you were in high school, I was in high school from 2005 to 2008. We did all Shakespeare and different kind of foreign literature. And I want to also tie that to another topic, like we've seen it. Like when I went to Germany in 2016, there was already a debate coming out about not only pulling down of statues, but also some people are arguing we should not be learning only European philosophers or white philosophers, especially from the Renaissance period. So it's John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, you have Rousseau, you have Voltaire, you have Immanuel Kant, all the German philosophers, Karl Marx and everybody. And most of them are basically only white. And you're like, I mean, in India, in Persia, in Africa, North Africa, even in years past, you had some so-called philosophers, not so-called, you had philosophers actually, but you don't find that being taught in, let's say, even university education.
And you had also, the questions you sent me, you talked about also the pseudo philosophy and the pseudo religion and the pseudo history that is coming out.
Yeah, also I think it ties in quite nicely. It's a much compact meta question. The idea of Afrocentricism, like the way it came up in the, let's say in the 50s and 60s in the US with J.A. Rogers, you had John Henry Clark, you had Rashidi Runoko, Ivan Van Setima, all this huge group, actually they're all in some pictures around here.
Yeah.
So like they came with the argument, for instance, John Henry Clark, he said quite clearly what they were doing was simply returning Africa back into its proper context. Like since 1500, when imperialism started, a lot of history, the achievement of black people, for instance, were whitewashed out of history. So we were simply refocusing the camera, so to speak. And a lot of backlash came from the white establishment, let's say in the US. And some of them even said like these people are teaching pseudo-history. And they're teaching lies in the name of history. Saying like ancient Egypt was not a black civilization. Yeah. Or so many other things.
But going there and knocking down noses from statues in Egypt.
Yeah.
So it's a wide question and complex.
Yeah, it's a very complex meta question.
But the thing is, what is the recognition in Europe that informs that ask of looking beyond their philosophers? I think it's a realization that once you examine history, you will realize that there are other philosophies elsewhere. And those philosophies, there's a way they had informed societies that's thrived beyond what is happening in the current civilization, so-called Western civilization. In my humble opinion, I actually think this civilization, the one we have right now, is so lacking because of that. If we look at how the Western civilization began, the current iteration of the Western civilization, or we could call it the white civilization, it starts with the Greeks going to Egypt.
Yeah.
And learning
a
black
lot from Egypt
philosophers. And there's even talk of how long it took for some of them. I think Socrates took about 40 years to be accepted into the academy in Egypt. Because in the academy you could not write things out, you had to memorize things, you had to learn how to memorize. Then that influenced the Romans in a way and came to the modern guys. There's a huge element of racism. Like blacks could not have done this. Blacks could not have built the pyramids. Blacks could not have developed a certain...
There's even a meme, a very popular meme from around that time. It was like, if you find any pyramids, not only in Egypt, but also in Latin America, like the Mayans and the Aztecs, like if you find a pyramid built somewhere, if it was not built by the whites, it was built by aliens.
There you go. And there was actually a movement that began to try and put white people in Egypt. I remember coming across some literature that was talking about the civilization of the white people who built the pyramids. There's a destruction of the library of Alexandria, and I think that was very deliberate because that knowledge, part of our history was there. I don't know, I suspect they did not destroy everything. I think they took some of those things to the Vatican or to Rome for that matter and kept them. So they are somewhere being kept, and that knowledge is being used today by a select people. So how do you organize society? How do you indoctrinate? How do you... There's a way that you mainstream certain ideas within society. And there's a way you put them once you have a philosophy. So the elite, they have a philosophy. They want a society that can achieve certain things. Then that is imbibed into your culture, your socialization, your religion, your education systems. So that you produce a certain kind of citizen. I think society has been doing this for the last 2,000 years and beyond. That's the one that creates now the national interest we talked about. And that's, I think, what Africa has been unable to do. And I would have no problem if we decided it is in Africa's interest to have a certain cadre of Africans who think in a certain way. And we need to educate them in a certain way and in a certain history. And let's say, call it even spin. Amplify some of our achievements. I think it's already happening all over social media. Africans are doing it themselves.
Yeah.
They are sharing memes of Egypt. They are sharing some of this history that was suppressed. It's coming out. Why shouldn't we systematize that?
Even on the media space, you see a lot of African vloggers, Wodemaya, many other people. They are covering, but they're also showing, hey, these are the good sides of Africa that rarely find themselves in, let's say, international media.
Because we need people to feel good about being African, first of all. So part of removing the mental slavery is being comfortable in the black skin. It's being comfortable being born in a village in Africa. And to do that, philosophers can argue, what do we need to do that?
Yeah.
What kind of education do you need that will remove those mental barriers, that will show you as an African child? Even if you're born and you went to school under a tree, that is not the limit, because there are these opportunities that right now with internet and smartphone, you can actually get an education. Right now, but it's just that we've refused to accept. Education is on TikTok.
Yeah.
That's where my 14-year-old daughter, my 8-year-old daughter, that's where they are learning. They're going to school because it's an obligation. You look at I consider this stupid thing of terms, that sometimes we even want kids to be drowned by floods, just so that they can go to school. We're not asking ourselves, wanaenda shule kufanya nini?
They can go to second term.
They can go to second term. And you are so fixated that
if you delay second term by 1 or 2 weeks, it will eat into third term.
It looks like it's a major national crisis. But why? Mostly because the parents don't want kids at home.
Yeah.
They want to go and work and look for money. Ostensibly to look after the same kids.
Yeah.
But instead of seeing it as an opportunity to spend more time with their children, they see that as a punishment. The fact that the kid is at home, they might have to hire help to look after those kids, or themselves stay at home to look after those kids. And so all this panic and whatever, it's about that.
So some people who argue that, for instance, even post-colonial African states, it's quite similar to the slavery plantations in the US and in the Caribbean, even today. Because if you're saying, let's say a parent, instead of spending more time with the kid, they're like, this kid needs to go to school so I can go work and get the money that I need to raise this kid.
The modern neo-colonial, the slavery today continues, only that you're given a wage, mostly a wage that cannot sustain you, cannot pay your bills. So you have to either work several jobs or work a job and have a side hustle. You have no time to spend with your children. The public education system, because of neoliberal policies, is not working. So you have to take your kids to an academy. So you need to earn more money to take them to a private school. You need, roads are not working. You need, they're potholed, you need to buy a 4x4.
Yeah.
The police are not working. You need your own private security.
Security.
So you need to earn the money to do that.
And live in a gated community, maybe?
Live in a gated community and put, wires, razor wires, and electric, whatever,
alarms.
and alarm systems and cameras, rather than fix the problem, which is bad governance. You'd rather, because capitalism tells you you're not working hard enough. The last 500 years we were talking about the European civilization, the Western civilization, has been about exploiting cheap labor, to develop Europe. We go back to voluntarily. And you do this by first slavery. So get blacks to give you free labor in the farms. Give them just enough food to survive and to have the energy to wake up and go and work for 12 hours in the farm. So that becomes unpalatable. Now we change, we design wage slavery. We have the industrial revolution. We have factories, we need factory workers. But if you pay them enough to save and start their own business, they will not have labor. So what do? Just pay them enough and then make sure that they take loans to survive or to pay rent in houses that you've built. So that now it becomes like a mentality, like you wake up, you are created to work. You wake up from the time you're young. I think those days in the 1800s, the minute you can walk, you went to a factory or a farm or whatever.
Or a coal mine.
As a kid. And you would spend your entire life until either disease killed you.
And in one day you'll work for like 16 hours.
Yeah. And you would die, most of the time you would die there because of the pollution and all
the
that.
black lung.
Yeah. And even today, if you tell people that you're not born to work, they will look at you like, what are you saying? That there are other things. You could just go somewhere and sit. It's possible in a society. Because it's up, when you talk about Scandinavia and the prisons where there are no guards.
Yeah.
And you go there and you're living in a better house than here where we are.
Yeah.
And it's a prison. And people cannot...
The mind cannot actually imagine such
Or a society that guarantees you, the minute you finish uni or college, even before you get your job, you have an apartment, it has a couch, fridge, TV. So those things are not a struggle. You're not struggling for those things. You're struggling to find a job to do other things.
Yeah.
Like that's basic in the society. What is the Kenyan dream? What is the African dream? What is the basic minimum the Kenyan society should have? Have you ever defined it?
No.
What are you working towards? So wage slavery, it's actually just, so the last 500 years are about cheap labor, so that you can maximize on profits for the capitalists. So you need to pay people cheaply, but you need them to keep coming to the office or to the factory or to wherever or to the farm because they cannot earn enough to save. And if whatever, then banking comes in and gives you loans, that means you have to even work harder.
Yeah.
And you have to train your kids in a certain way and socialism in a certain way so they can be workers of next year or the next 20 years.
The next
and
generation.
it becomes cyclic. It becomes cyclic because you're not asking
the
yourself,
conveyor belt.
The conveyor belt. Why are we doing this, And I think part of what we need to do to liberate ourselves as Africans, and now you're circling back, is to plant that idea to liberate Africans mentally, which is what part of the movement I'm part of called Africans Rising, where Makoche, it's a movement of movements. We are bringing all these progressive leftist movements across Africa that are saying we can have a different Africa, and we can remember our history, and our history was very different from now. And the things we were told were backwards were not. They were just not white. They were just not European. Right now, there are people who are actually talking about our science. If you listen to Joshua Maponga, he talk about witchcraft, and he jokes about, like, the white man came and said, witchcraft is that? Witchcraft. How are they healing each other, and how are they witchcraft? Then it was called witchcraft. But he was asking which, he jokes about it. But he was saying...
Maponga is very interesting. I
was with
really
him
watch a lot of his videos.
Last week in Lusaka.
Interesting.
And we spent some time together.
He's from Zambia?
He's from Zimbabwe.
From Zimbabwe,
yeah.
Okay.
But it used to be called Rhodesia. I mean, they're the same people.
Northern and
Zambia.
Southern.
Yeah. So witchcraft is that? And now most of the medicine that has been made into pills and syrups was the traditional plants our healers used to use.
Yeah.
And that knowledge was existing. And we know that even surgery was being done. Open heart and head. They would do surgeries. If you have migraines, you have a growth in your head, it will be removed.
Yeah.
And you would survive.
I don't know if it's a story or something I've read about in the Kisii area.
There's actually a video. I'll forward
There's
it
a
to you.
video.
There's a video.
I think then I might have seen that video, but I couldn't quite place it. Of like a brain surgery, head surgery. Was it 1910s?
Yeah.
It was a long time.
It was a long time. It's early those days, but there were cameras then, so they were able to record it. And even the narration was in awe. The white man who was narrating could not believe that is possible because it was then not possible in Europe.
Yeah.
So it was possible in Africa. So those are the stories we need to surface.
And even if you go to ancient Egypt, like with the embalming of the bodies,
they had to have mapped the human
the organs
anatomy,
of the body,
organs. They knew which organs went bad, which ones to remove, how to push the embalming liquid throughout the veins in a dead body.
In a dead body.
Yeah. So they knew, how to do that. That means they understood the anatomy, the veins system, and all that. So this knowledge was there, but in the last 500 years, because we've been focused on working, we have no time to we've had no time to explore. And part of the forgetting of our history is because you don't have time to research. Then you come home, you're so tired, you black out. You're coming home from work at 6. If it's a lady, she wants to cook for the family. Then she sleeps at 9, wakes up at 5 to prepare kids to go to school.
And the conveyor belt once
she
again.
only pause when she's dead.
Yeah.
The conveyor belt continues. So that's the space where, hopefully, going back to CBC was supposed to free us from some of these working towards to be a slave within a system, but towards enabling kids to develop creativity, to explore other things they could do. And even if you have to make money to survive, there are other ways. People are making money right now with in an economy where it's not creating jobs, the traditional jobs, but people are surviving.
Yeah.
People are doing other things. Our creativity now, the
Becoming
arts have
creative
gone
and innovative.
I mean, right now, if you go to Ben Soul concert, you wouldn't believe, that is a Kenyan musician who is attracting such crowds and charging such amounts of money for tickets. Look at some of our bands, like Sauti Sol. It's not even Kenyan anymore, it's continental, it's global. Or when you go and see Burna Boy fill a stadium in Spain, where he's singing in his Nigerian accent. Pidgin, and it's Spain, and the 50,000 people have filled that stadium who don't even understand what he's saying.
Yeah.
But his creativity can transcend language and borders. I think that's what we need to have. Those are the philosophies we need to amplify.
Okay.
And even when we talk about a borderless Africa, right now music is borderless. Our creativity as Africans has become borderless.
And even in years past, talk about something, let's say, like Rumba or Lingala, and Africans in Kenya, you are in Cameroon, anywhere across the entire continent, and the music that was coming from the DRC Congo, or Zaire back as it was known, like it was all over. So
fashion. Nairobi used to be one of the fashion capitals of the world. The Kitenges and the maxis and the bell bottoms and the polyester shirts and those shoes that were, the platforms.
Yeah.
I mean, when you talked about New York, Tokyo, Madrid, whatever fashion, Nairobi was there.
Oh, okay.
And the music, all those Congolese came to Nairobi. Benga was developed because they were running away from Mobutu. They came, they were welcomed to Nairobi. And that cross pollination.
And that's why also the strong influence that Rumba had in Kenya until today.
Oh. And that's this for me. We need now African philosophers, modern ones, who are able to bring this to the fore and see how it can be infused into education systems, into our social systems, into our cultural systems. I'm very interested in whether it's possible to develop a culture that can become Kenyan. Because we do have Kikuyu culture, Luo culture, Maasai culture, Somali culture. We have 42 cultures, 42 nations, each with its culture. And those cultures have kind of been maintained to some extent. Some more than others. But is it possible to develop a Kenyan culture that is not about corruption? Because
you eat where you work.
Right now, the only thing we agree on is that you eat where you work, But is it possible to actually sit and develop a philosophy around a Kenyan culture and then go out and implement it? And I'm working on that. That's all actually Mzalendo Halisi Foundation is about that. It's about finding how do you become patriotic to a nation that is imaginary, because we've never been a nation as Kenya. We're just a country that was created by the white people. How do we make Kenya a nation? I hope I've answered your question in a roundabout way.
I mean, you've touched quite well on it. So
you talked about decolonization. We have to nurture and catalyze African nations that are not a continuation of the colonial extractive state. I think that's where decolonization will happen. And you have to deliberately sit and imagine a society and then create the systems that will bring that society to life. And maybe for us, we lay the foundation, like you're doing maybe with this podcast. And then others will come and build on it.